Number 8. Marie Antoinette's cake. You're probably familiar with the most famous and most famously heartless quote in French history, "Let them eat cake." It's the moment when the last queen of France, Marie Antoinette, allegedly heard that her starving subjects had no bread and responded with a flippant, sugary dismissal. It's the perfect story to show how out of touch the monarchy was before the French Revolution. The only problem? She never said it. Not even close. The phrase had actually been around for at least a century before she was born, appearing in the writings of philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who attributed it to a great princess from a generation earlier. The quote was already a classic bit of political propaganda used to paint the aristocracy as callous monsters. So when the revolution finally came around, it was easy to pin the famous line on the young, foreign-born queen who was already deeply unpopular. The phrase became a convenient catch-all for every bit of royal excess and indifference. It was a meme before memes existed, and it was used to justify a whole lot of beheadings. The real Marie Antoinette, despite her lavish lifestyle, actually showed some charity toward the poor and was known to be naive rather than maliciously cruel. The truth is, if she had said something like that, it would have been recorded and widely distributed at the time. But it wasn't. The quote was retroactively assigned to her to create a villain, a perfect symbol of everything wrong with the old regime. So next time you hear someone use the phrase, you can smugly inform them that they're quoting a piece of historical fan fiction. Number 7. The Great Wall of China from space. You're floating in the inky blackness of space, 1,000,000 miles from Earth. You look down, and there it is, a tiny blue marble, swirled with white clouds. But wait, you've heard this your whole life. The only man-made object visible from the moon is the Great Wall of China. It's a classic trivia fact, a point of national pride, and a stunning testament to human engineering. It also happens to be completely false. The myth started in the 19th century, well before we ever went to space. The idea was first floated by an English writer and has been repeated countless times ever since, becoming a piece of universally accepted, but completely inaccurate, historical folklore. The truth is, the Great Wall is, on average, only about 20 feet wide and is made of stone and earth that blends seamlessly into the surrounding terrain. Even astronauts in low Earth orbit, the ones who are much closer than the moon, have a hard time spotting it without knowing exactly where to look. They can, however, see highways, airports, and massive bridges. It turns out, big, wide, paved things are easier to see than a long, narrow wall. Neil Armstrong, the first guy on the moon, famously said he couldn't see it. In fact, what people often see from space and mistake for the wall are riverbeds and mountain ranges. Basically, our romanticized view of human achievement is so strong that we made up a story about a wall that's just not that visible. The truth is, the only thing you can see from the moon is the profound loneliness of being on the moon, which is a whole different video. Number 6. Viking horns. If you close your eyes and picture a Viking, what do you see? You probably see a huge, burly dude with a massive beard, a leather tunic, a giant axe, and most importantly, a helmet with 2 massive horns sticking out of the sides. This image is so deeply ingrained in our collective consciousness that it feels like historical fact. It's on every cartoon, every movie poster, every sports team logo. The only problem is that Vikings never, ever wore helmets with horns. Archaeologists have uncovered countless Viking helmets, and not a single one has a horn on it. Their helmets were practical and functional, simple, conical caps or dome-shaped helmets, sometimes with a nose guard. So where did this horned image come from? The myth was invented by a costume designer for an 1876 production of Richard Wagner's opera Der Ring des Nibelungen. The designer, Karl Emil Doppler, wanted to make the Viking characters look more dramatic and savage, so he added the horns. The theatrical flair was a huge hit, and the image quickly became associated with Vikings everywhere. So our entire collective understanding of a ferocious seafaring warrior culture is based on a piece of 19th century opera house set design. It's the ultimate example of a guy with a glue gun and some cardboard having more influence on history than 1,000 years of archaeological evidence. Number 5. George Washington and the Cherry Tree. Remember that story from grade school? Young George Washington gets a new hatchet, and like any little kid with a sharp new toy, he decides to try it out on his dad's prized cherry tree. When his very angry father confronts him, little George, with tears in his eyes, confesses, "I cannot tell a lie. I did cut it with my hatchet." This story is a staple of American mythology, meant to show the unimpeachable honesty and moral fiber of our nation's first president. It's also completely, 100%, made up. The tale was invented by a bookseller and minister named Mason Locke Weems in his 1806 biography, The Life of Washington. Weems, who published the book 7 years after Washington's death, wanted to present him not just as a great leader, but as a moral paragon. So he just wrote a little fable. The cherry tree story was an instant hit because it was a simple, easy-to-digest moral lesson that made Washington an even more revered figure. It became a piece of American folklore that was taught to generations of schoolchildren. It's a perfect example of a myth being more powerful than the truth. A complex historical figure, a slave owner and a brilliant military strategist, was reduced to a two-dimensional cartoon character to sell books and promote an ideal. Basically, our country's founding father got a PR team a century after he died, and they thought the best way to make him look good was by turning him into the poster child for not telling a lie, even though the story itself was a lie. Number 4. Napoleon's height. Everybody knows Napoleon was short. It's a foundational piece of trivia, the source of the term Napoleon complex, and the inspiration for countless jokes and caricatures of a tiny, angry man with a giant hat. But what if I told you that Napoleon wasn't actually short at all? In fact, he was pretty average for a man of his time. The myth of Napoleon's diminutive stature comes from a combination of British propaganda and a simple translation error. His actual height was about 5'7", 170 centimeters, which was slightly above the average height for a Frenchman in the early 19th century. So where did the short idea come from? First, he was often seen surrounded by his imperial guard, who were all handpicked to be tall, making him look shorter by comparison. Second, the British, his sworn enemies, seized on a misinterpretation of his height measurement. The French inch was slightly larger than the British inch. When his height was recorded as 5 feet 2 inches in French units, the British translated this directly, making him seem much shorter than he was. They then ran with the idea, and the image of a tiny, power-hungry man became the ultimate caricature to mock and delegitimize him. So the entire psychological term and the world's most famous historical height joke are based on a simple conversion error and some very effective propaganda. It's the ultimate example of how a single bad translation can change history. Number 3. Isaac Newton's apple, a quiet afternoon, an apple tree, and a brilliant man. The story of Isaac Newton and the apple is a foundational piece of scientific lore. An apple falls from a tree and hits him on the head, and in that single, cartoonishly convenient moment, Newton has his grand epiphany about gravity. He saw the apple fall and thought, "Wait a minute, why does it fall straight down and not sideways or up?" It's a perfect story for a children's book, a beautiful example of a scientific breakthrough springing from a simple, relatable event. The only problem is that the bonk on the head part is a delightful piece of historical fiction. Newton himself loved telling the story, but he was known to embellish it over the years. The apple did fall, and he did see it, and it did lead him to think about the nature of gravity. But the dramatic, head-bumping element was a later addition, a bit of narrative flair he added to make his discovery more digestible for a wider audience. He basically created a simplified, theatrical version of his own life's work, because the truth, a long, arduous process of observation, thought, and mathematical calculation, is frankly a lot less exciting. It's a testament to the fact that even the greatest minds know how to sell a good story. Basically, Isaac Newton gave us a brilliant scientific principle, and then he gave us a memorable, if inaccurate, origin story for it, which is the historical equivalent of a rock band inventing a new genre of music and then telling you they came up with the name while watching a funny movie. Number 2. Witches burned at the stake. When you think of the Salem witch trials, you probably picture bonfires, wooden stakes, and screaming. The image of a person being burned alive for witchcraft is one of the most chilling and iconic images of that dark chapter in American history. It's a scene that's been depicted in countless movies and TV shows, so it feels like a historical fact. But as horrifying as the Salem witch trials were, no one was ever burned at the stake. In colonial America, burning a person was not a legal form of execution. Instead, the victims of the Salem witch trials who were found guilty were hanged. In total, 19 people were hanged, and one man was pressed to death with heavy stones for refusing to enter a plea. The myth of witches being burned comes from Europe, where it was a more common practice. The two historical events have been so conflated over time that we've replaced one horrible reality with an entirely different, but equally horrible one. So while it's important to remember the injustice and the human toll of the trials, the image of the bonfire is just a grim piece of historical fiction that we've all collectively agreed to believe. It's a powerful reminder that history is often stranger, and sometimes less fiery, than the fiction we create about it. Number 1. Thomas Edison's light bulb. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. It's one of the first things you learn in school, a fundamental piece of American innovation that changed the world. We picture a lone genius in his lab, a man who famously said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work," before finally hitting on the perfect filament. But like a lot of these historical tales, this one is a massive oversimplification. Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb. He invented the first commercially viable one. The truth is, dozens of inventors were working on light bulbs at the same time, and many had working prototypes long before Edison's famous 1879 patent. A British inventor named Joseph Swan, for example, had a functional incandescent light bulb a full year before Edison. Edison's genius wasn't in having a singular idea, but in taking a great idea and making it practical. He improved the vacuum inside the bulb to make the filament last longer. And most importantly, he created an entire system around it. Power stations, electrical wiring, and switches. He made it so you could actually buy a light bulb, plug it in, and have it work reliably. He wasn't the guy who lit up the world with a single invention. He was the guy who built the entire electrical grid that made that light bulb useful. So while he's remembered as the lone inventor, he was really a brilliant engineer and an even better businessman. He didn't invent the light bulb. He just figured out how to sell it to you.